The city was busy, filled with rushing cars and people hurrying to work. Shops opened their doors, children laughed on their way to school, and street vendors shouted about their food. Yet in the middle of all this noise, one strange sight made everyone whisper. She stood beneath a sign that read, "Help Wanted," but she was not human. Her skin glowed faintly like silver under the sun, smooth and without blemish. Her large dark eyes seemed to reflect more than light. They seemed to reflect pain and longing. People avoided her. They crossed the street rather than walk too close. Some whispered she was dangerous. Others muttered she was a government experiment escaped from a lab. But she didn't move, she didn't speak. She only stood there beneath the sign. As if waiting for something, hours passed. The morning turned into noon. The noon turned into evening. Still she stood there silent, holding her hands together tightly as if afraid they might shake apart. She wore no shoes, only a thin cloak that looked like it belonged to another world. When the wind blew, her cloak shifted and revealed faint scars on her ankles, scars that looked like she had once been bound. A group of teenagers threw a stone at her from across the street. Laughing, the stone hit the ground near her feet. But she didn't flinch, she only blinked slowly. Like someone used to cruelty, a shopkeeper shouted for her to leave. But she did not leave, she stayed under the sign, staring at it as if those two words were her only hope. Most people hurried past, but one man slowed down. His name was Daniel, a factory worker with tired eyes and calloused hands. He had walked this road many times, yet today he noticed her. He stopped a few steps away and looked at her closely. Her presence made him uneasy. Still, something about her silence pulled at him. "Hey," he said carefully. "You lost or something?" She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking on his face. For a moment, Daniel felt like he was staring into an endless night sky. Then she spoke, her voice soft and broken. "Help. Wanted," Daniel frowned. "You mean, you're looking for work?" She nodded quickly. Though it seemed like she didn't really understand, he hesitated. Why would an alien, if that's what she was, stand here all day under this sign? Why not hide? Why not run? Why not go somewhere safe? He asked again, "Do you need food? Do you need a place?" Her lips trembled, but she only repeated, "Home." That single word struck Daniel's chest harder than anything. She wasn't looking for a job, she was looking for someone to take her in. People around them glared at him, some shaking their heads. A woman whispered, "Don't talk to her." "She'll bring trouble," an old man muttered. "That thing doesn't belong here." Daniel felt the weight of their eyes. But when he looked back at the alien woman, he saw her fingers shaking, clutching the edge of the sign as if her life depended on it. The sky darkened, the streetlights flickered on. Still she waited, still no one came to take her. Daniel sighed deeply. He could walk away, pretend he never saw her, live his life in peace. But could he really sleep at night knowing she would still be standing here tomorrow, hungry, cold, and alone? He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Do you have a name?" he asked. She blinked slowly, then whispered something in her own tongue. The sound was beautiful yet broken, like glass bells shattering in the wind. Daniel couldn't repeat it, so he simply said, "All right. I'll call you Star since you look like you fell from the sky." For the first time, her lips curved into the faintest smile. It was small, but it was real. Daniel rubbed his neck, unsure what he was doing. "Listen, Star," he said, "you can't stand here all night. People are going to cause you trouble." Her eyes widened. She shook her head quickly. "No trouble. No trouble." Her words were desperate, her voice cracking. Daniel realized she wasn't just waiting, she was hiding. But from who or from what he didn't know. He looked at her scars again, the way she hugged her arms tightly around herself. And he knew this wasn't just some lost traveler. This was someone running from pain, from chains, from something far worse. A cold breeze swept through the street. She shivered under her thin cloak, her teeth chattering though she tried to hide it. Daniel took a deep breath. "All right," he muttered. "Come with me." She tilted her head, unsure. He held out his hand. For a long moment she stared at it as though it was the most dangerous thing she had ever seen. Then slowly she placed her trembling hand in his. Her skin was cool, almost too smooth, but it was a hand of someone desperate for trust. Daniel pulled her gently, leading her away from the sign. Behind them, people whispered louder, some angry, some fearful. But Daniel didn't look back. For reasons he didn't fully understand, He had just invited an alien stranger into his life. And deep down, he already knew this choice would change everything. Daniel led her away from the glowing sign, his heart beating faster with every step. He kept asking himself why he was doing this, why he had not turned his back like everyone else. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, like he was the last chance she had. Maybe it was the way her voice cracked on the single word home. Whatever it was, he couldn't leave her out there to freeze in the night air. The streets grew quieter as they moved away from the market. Star, at least that was the name he had given her, walked close behind him. Her steps soft and careful, she didn't speak, only looked around with wide eyes as if every lamp, every car, every human face was strange and dangerous. When a group of children ran past laughing, she flinched, her shoulders tightening like she expected them to attack. Daniel noticed and frowned, wondering what kind of life she had escaped. His apartment wasn't much, just a small one-room place above a noisy shop. The walls were cracked, the furniture second-hand, and the air smelled faintly of oil from the factory on the corner. But when he opened the door and stepped aside, Star entered slowly as if stepping into a palace. Her eyes moved over the broken couch, the old table, the simple kitchen. She touched the edge of a chair with her long fingers. As if testing whether it was real, Daniel scratched his head, embarrassed. Yeah, it's not much, but it's warm at least. He offered her food. Pulling a can of soup from the cupboard, she watched him carefully as he heated it, her eyes following every small movement. When he placed the bowl in front of her, she leaned close, sniffing it like a cautious animal. Her lips moved in a whisper of her own language. Then she dipped the spoon slowly and took a bite. Her eyes closed, and for the first time he saw relief on her face. She ate slowly, every mouthful careful, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Daniel looked away, pretending not to notice. But inside his chest something tightened when she finished. She placed the spoon down gently as if it was precious. She whispered in broken words. Good. Warm. Thank. Daniel nodded. You're welcome, Star. He tried to ask more questions. Where are you from? How did you get here? Do you have family? But she only shook her head, her lips pressing tightly shut. Her silence was heavy, filled with secrets she was not ready to share. Later that night, Daniel spread a blanket on the couch for her. You can sleep here, he said, pointing. She looked at the blanket, then at him and whispered softly, Safe. Daniel gave a tired smile. Yeah, safe. She lowered herself onto the couch, curling up like a child trying to make herself small. Daniel turned off the lights and went to his bed in the corner. But sleep did not come easily. At some point deep in the night, he woke suddenly. A soft humming filled the room, low and strange. He turned his head and saw her glowing faintly in the dark. Her body shimmered with a silver light, her lips moving as she whispered in a language he couldn't understand. It was not just words, it was like a song, a broken prayer. Daniel sat up, uncertain whether he should interrupt. But something told him to stay quiet. The glow faded slowly and she fell still. Breathing softly in sleep, Daniel lay back, but his thoughts spun in circles. Who was she really? And what had he just brought into his home? The next morning, Star was already awake. Sitting cross-legged on the couch, she stared at the rising sun through the dusty window, as if she had never seen such a thing. Daniel made coffee and offered her bread. She accepted it with both hands, bowing her head as if it was some sacred gift. Star, he said carefully, I need to know, why were you under that sign all day? She looked at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. She pointed to the words on the paper above his desk, slowly tracing the letters with her finger. Help. Wanted, she said again, voice trembling. Daniel realized the truth. She didn't know what the sign really meant. She'd just seen the words and clung to them, because they were the only ones she understood. He leaned back in his chair, stunned, so she wasn't searching for work. She was searching for help. She was searching for someone, anyone, to give her a place to stay. Daniel rubbed his face, muttering, What have I gotten myself into? But when he looked at her sitting there, fragile yet somehow unbroken, he couldn't imagine telling her to leave. Outside, voices drifted from the street below. Two men stood on the corner, whispering, glancing up at his window. Daniel didn't know it yet, but word of him taking her in was already spreading.
And not everyone would be pleased about a human helping an alien.
Inside the apartment, Star tilted her head, her sharp ears catching sounds even Daniel missed. Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment the glow returned faintly to her skin. Daniel felt a chill. He had made his choice, but now he wondered what dangers that choice would bring. The evening fell heavy on the city. Shadows stretched long across the narrow streets, and the sound of traffic faded into the distance. Daniel closed his small apartment window. Trying to keep out the cold wind, Star sat quietly on the couch, her silver skin catching the faint light of the lamp. She had not spoken much all day, only short words, only when he asked. Mostly she sat in silence, her dark eyes watching every detail around her, as if memorizing the human world. Daniel cooked a simple meal of rice and vegetables. When he placed the bowl in front of her, she studied it for a long moment before eating. Every bite she took was slow, cautious, as though food itself was still something strange to her. When she finished, she placed the spoon carefully on the table. Her hands shaking slightly, she whispered in her broken English, "Good, safe, warm." Daniel nodded. "Yeah, you're safe here." But inside he was not sure how true those words were. After dinner, Daniel tried to explain small things to her. He pointed to objects and said their names: chair, table, window, lamp. She repeated them softly, her voice thin and uneven. Sometimes she got the words wrong, but her eyes lit up whenever she managed to say one correctly. It reminded Daniel of a child learning to speak, though her gaze carried the weight of someone who had seen too much suffering. When she tried to say his name, Daniel, it came out soft and almost broken. But hearing it in her voice made him smile for reasons he couldn't explain. As the night grew colder, Daniel gave her a blanket. She pulled it close around her shoulders and curled up on the couch. Her eyes flickered shut, but she didn't seem to fall asleep easily. Instead, she kept shifting, her breathing uneven, her hands gripping the blanket tight. Daniel wondered if she had nightmares chasing her even when her eyes were closed. Finally, near midnight, she grew still, her chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. Daniel was about to sleep himself when a sound reached his ears. It was soft at first, like humming under the floor. He sat up and turned his head. The glow was back, faint silver light spreading from Star's body. Her lips moved in whispers, words from a language he could not understand. The sound was haunting, like a song that carried both sorrow and hope. Daniel felt frozen, unable to look away. Her voice rose slightly, echoing like distant bells, and then faded into a whisper again. The light pulsed with her words, brighter with sorrow, dimmer with silence. He wanted to wake her, to ask what she was doing, but something inside warned him not to. It felt private, sacred, like stepping into a prayer not meant for human ears. So he watched in silence, his heart pounding. Finally the glow dimmed, her whispers stopped, and she sank into quiet sleep once more. Daniel lay back, staring at the ceiling. "What are you, Star?" he whispered, but no answer came. The hours crept slowly toward dawn. Daniel drifted into uneasy sleep, filled with strange dreams of stars falling and voices calling his name. When the first light of morning touched the window, he awoke to find her sitting upright again. Her dark eyes were fixed on the sunrise, as if she had been waiting for it all night. She held the blanket close, her expression unreadable. Daniel rubbed his eyes, yawning. "You didn't sleep much, did you?" She turned her head slightly. "Sleep. Not safe." Her words were simple, but her tone carried the weight of fear he could not understand. He made coffee and offered her bread. She accepted both with quiet hands, eating in silence. After a moment, she pointed at the window, at the rising sun. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, and she whispered, "Bright. Home?" Daniel frowned, unsure. "No, not home. This is Earth." But she shook her head gently, as if she knew something he did not. He wondered again where she came from, and why she had ended up standing under that sign. Later that day, Daniel left briefly to buy more food. When he returned, he froze at the door. Star was kneeling on the floor, her hands pressed together, glowing faintly again. But this time, her whispers were faster, almost frantic. She looked up when he entered, her glow fading quickly, her face full of guilt. Daniel set the bag down slowly. "What was that?" She shook her head. "Nothing. Nothing." But her trembling hands betrayed her fear. Daniel didn't push, but the unease in his chest grew heavier. Something was wrong, something she was hiding. She had chosen his home for safety. But what was she really running from? And why did her body glow like a star in the night? As she sat back on the couch, clutching the blanket again, Daniel realized one thing. Bringing her home was not just an act of kindness anymore. It was a choice that had tied his life to hers, and whether he liked it or not, that choice was about to pull him into a world far bigger than his own. The day stretched long, and the silence in Daniel's apartment grew heavier. Star moved quietly, always careful, always watching. She seemed grateful for the bread and soup he gave her, but she never asked for more. She kept close to the couch as if afraid to take too much space. Daniel worked at his small desk, pretending to focus, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. The image of her glowing in the night haunted him, and the sound of her whispers still echoed in his head. Finally, he set down his tools and sighed. "Star," he said gently, "I need to know the truth." She froze, her fingers clutching the edge of the blanket, her dark eyes lifted toward him, full of hesitation. Daniel leaned forward. "You were glowing last night, whispering words I couldn't understand. You were praying or calling someone, weren't you?" Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent. "Please," Daniel continued, "if I don't understand who you are, I can't keep you safe." For a long time she didn't move, then slowly, she unwrapped the blanket from her shoulders. Her cloak slipped, revealing faint scars across her arms and ankles. They looked like burns and cuts, marks left by something sharp and cruel. Daniel's chest tightened. "Someone did this to you?" She lowered her head and whispered in her broken English. "Chains." Her voice cracked on the word, her hands shaking as she traced one of the scars. They sell like animal." Daniel's jaw clenched, his stomach turning. So she wasn't just lost. She was running from captors, people, aliens. Whoever they were, had treated her like property. Star lifted her eyes again, tears forming. Escape," she whispered. "Run, far, hide." Daniel's voice softened. "How did you end up here on Earth?" She closed her eyes, her words coming slow and broken. "Ship, broken, crash." "Alone," her voice shook. "No home, no family. Only chains, always chains." Daniel felt a cold weight in his chest. She hadn't been waiting under the sign for work. She had been waiting for a human who might see her as more than an animal. He rubbed his forehead, struggling to find the right words. "You came to the sign because it said help wanted," he said slowly. Star nodded, clutching the blanket again. "Only words." "I know," she whispered. "I wait. Maybe someone help." Daniel leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed. Of all the thousands of people who had walked past her, he had been the one to stop, and now her life was tied to his. The room fell quiet but not peaceful. Outside, footsteps echoed on the street, lingering too long. Daniel moved to the window and glanced down. Two men in dark coats stood near the corner, their eyes scanning the building. He cursed under his breath and stepped back quickly. Star noticed his reaction, her body stiffening. Her skin shimmered faintly as if ready to glow again. "They," she whispered, "hunters." Daniel's heart raced. "They're here already?" She nodded, her face pale. "Always follow, never stop." Daniel grabbed his jacket and began pacing. "All right, listen, if they know you're here, we can't just stay locked in this apartment." Star's voice broke. "If they find, they take. I die." Daniel knelt in front of her, forcing her to look at him. "Not if I can help it," he said firmly. But even as he spoke, he knew he was just one man, with no weapons, no power. How could he fight alien hunters who had chased her across the stars? That night, the fear in the air was sharp enough to taste. Daniel barely slept, every sound outside making him sit up in alarm. Star curled into herself on the couch, her body glowing faintly as if she could not control it anymore. Her whispers returned, faster this time, full of panic. Daniel touched her shoulder gently. "Hey, it's all right. You're safe here." She turned her head slowly, her eyes glimmering with tears. "Safe. Not real," she whispered. "Safe. Dream." Daniel's throat tightened, but he kept his hand steady on her shoulder. "I don't care what's real or not," he said. "You're safe with me as long as I breathe." For a moment, her glow softened. She looked at him with something deeper than gratitude. Almost trust. It was fragile, like glass. But it was there, and Daniel knew that trust might be the only weapon they had. The dawn crept in, painting the sky pale gray. Daniel stood by the window, watching the empty street. His mind raced with questions. How long could he hide her? What would happen if the hunters broke down his door? And why, out of all humans, had she chosen him behind him? Star's voice rose in a whisper. Her broken English carried across the quiet room. "Daniel," she said softly. "Thank you." He turned, meeting her gaze, and for the first time, he realized he wasn't just protecting her. He was standing at the edge of something far greater, something that would pull him into dangers and secrets beyond Earth. The past was revealed, but the future was a storm waiting to break. The morning was gray and heavy, clouds thick over the city. Daniel sat at the table, his coffee untouched. Star sat quietly on the couch, wrapped in the blanket, her eyes fixed on the window. She had not spoken much since last night, but the fear in her face told Daniel all he needed to know. The hunters were close, closer than ever. When footsteps echoed again outside, Daniel froze. He moved to the window carefully and lifted the curtain just a little. 2 men in black coats stood across the street, their posture too sharp, their movements too precise. They were not ordinary men. Their eyes scanned the building as if they knew exactly what they were looking for. One of them raised a small device that glowed faintly blue. Daniel's chest tightened. "They're not just watching," he muttered. "They're tracking." Star stood, her body trembling. "They find me," she whispered. "Always find." Her skin began to shimmer faintly with silver light. Daniel shook his head quickly. "No, don't glow now. They'll see it." She pressed her hands together, fighting to keep the light down. Daniel grabbed his jacket, heart pounding. "Come on. We can't stay here. Pack nothing, just move." He pulled her toward the back door. The stairwell smelled of dust and oil. Every step creaking under their weight, Star moved silently. But her eyes darted in every direction. Daniel pushed open the back door into the alley. The street was quiet for a moment. Then a voice rang out in a language Daniel had never heard. Harsh and sharp, the hunters were already there. Stepping out from the shadows, Daniel froze, his body stiff. One of the hunters raised a small black weapon that hummed with deadly energy. Star gasped, her body glowing brighter in panic. The second hunter barked another command, pointing at her with the device. Daniel's instincts screamed at him to run. He grabbed Star's hand and pulled her hard, racing down the alley. A blast of blue light struck the wall behind them. Sending sparks across the bricks, the hunters shouted and gave chase. Daniel's heart pounded like thunder. His lungs burned as he dragged her through twisting alleys. Star ran beside him, her steps light, her cloak flying behind her. But the hunters were fast, their weapons cutting through the air. Another blast struck a metal bin, exploding it into pieces. Daniel ducked. Pulling Star down with him, they scrambled forward, slipping through narrow paths only locals knew. But the hunters were relentless, their boots striking the ground like war drums. At the edge of the alley, Daniel saw the crowded marketplace. He pulled Star into the chaos of shouting vendors and rushing people. "Blend in," he muttered, though he knew she could never truly blend in. Her silver skin caught the light even under her hood. People turned their heads, whispering, pointing. And soon the hunters pushed into the market too. Their weapons hidden but their intent clear. Daniel's mind raced. He couldn't fight them, not with bare hands. But he couldn't let them take her either. Star's breathing quickened, her glow breaking through the thin fabric of her cloak. "Star," Daniel hissed, "control it." She shook her head, eyes wide with panic. "When they see me." "Always see." As one of the hunters closed in, reaching out, something strange happened. Star lifted her trembling hands. For a moment, the world around them bent. Light shimmered like water, folding over their bodies. Daniel gasped as his own hand vanished before his eyes. The hunter's gaze swept past them. Confused, they were invisible, hidden inside her light. Daniel whispered in awe, "You can do this." Star's voice shook, only short time. Her body trembled, the glow flickering. Daniel grabbed her hand and pulled her through the crowd. People brushed past without noticing them. The hunters searched, angry and frustrated, their devices clicking in their hands, but Star kept them hidden, her power bending light like a shield. They ducked into another alley, Star collapsing against the wall. Her glow faded, leaving her pale and shaking. Daniel knelt beside her. "You saved us." Her lips curved faintly, but her voice was weak, not safe. "They follow." Always, Daniel clenched his fists. Looking back toward the marketplace where the hunters still searched, he knew she was right. They wouldn't stop until they had her again that night. Back in the safety of another abandoned building, Daniel made her sit while he caught his breath. He could barely believe what had happened. Her ability to vanish, to bend light, it was more than anything he had ever imagined. But it came with a cost. She looked exhausted, drained. Star leaned against the wall, whispering softly, Slow you down." Daniel shook his head. "No, you kept us alive. Without you, we'd be dead by now." Outside, the sound of strange engines hummed faintly in the distance. Daniel peered through a crack in the broken wall. A ship hovered high above the clouds, its outline barely visible in the gray night sky. His heart sank. The hunters weren't just walking the streets, they had brought their ship. Hidden where humans wouldn't notice, they were here in force. And they weren't going to leave without her. Daniel turned back to Star, his jaw set. "Then we'll fight," he said quietly. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me first." Star's dark eyes widened, shimmering with fear and something else, hope. For the first time, she reached out and took his hand. Holding it tightly, her voice was soft but steady. Together, Daniel nodded, feeling the weight of the storm closing in around them. The hunters had arrived, but this battle was only beginning. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and dust. Broken windows let in the cold night air. Daniel and Star crouched behind a stack of crates, their breaths quick and shallow. Outside, heavy footsteps echoed. The hunters were searching, their voices sharp in the alien tongue. The sound of their strange devices clicking filled the dark space. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, his hands gripping a broken metal pipe he had found on the floor. He glanced at Star. She was pale, her glow faint, her body trembling from the effort of hiding them earlier. Yet her eyes were sharp, watching the shadows with quiet determination. "They come," she whispered, her voice fragile but steady. Daniel nodded. "Then we stand, no more running." The hunters entered through the broken door, their tall frames casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dark, scanning the warehouse like wolves scenting prey. One of them raised the blue tracking device, and its light pulsed brighter as it locked onto Star. Daniel clenched his jaw. "They know where we are." Star's glow grew stronger as if answering the pull of the device. She shivered, clutching Daniel's arm. "They take me. Again." Daniel shook his head fiercely. "Not while I'm alive." The hunters stepped closer, weapons humming with deadly energy. Daniel rose from behind the crates, gripping the pipe with both hands. "Stay back," he shouted, though his voice cracked with fear. The hunters only laughed, their voices cruel and mocking. One of them aimed his weapon at Daniel, ready to fire. But before the blast could come, Star's body erupted in light. A wave of silver energy pulsed outward. Shaking the floor, the hunters staggered back. Shielding their eyes, Daniel gasped, blinded for a moment when his vision cleared. He saw the hunters struggling to regain their balance. Star stood tall, her cloak falling away, her skin glowing brighter than the lamps overhead. Her voice rose in her strange language, words flowing like music, sharp and strong. The hunters snarled and fired their weapons, but the blasts bent away from her, curving into the walls. The air shimmered like a shield around her body. Daniel stepped forward, swinging the metal pipe at the nearest hunter. It struck the man's weapon, knocking it aside with a loud crack. The hunter roared and shoved him back, but Daniel held his ground. Adrenaline rushed through him, his muscles burning. Another hunter lunged, and Daniel ducked, swinging the pipe upward into the creature's jaw. The hunter stumbled, hissing in pain. For a moment, Daniel realized something strange. Their weapons were powerful, but their bodies were not invincible. Star moved closer, raising her hands, her glow expanded, wrapping around Daniel like a second skin. He felt heat rush through him, filling him with strength. His arms no longer felt heavy. His fear melted into focus. "Together," she whispered, her eyes blazing. Daniel nodded, gripping the pipe tighter. The hunters regrouped, their leader barking orders in their harsh tongue. They spread out, surrounding Daniel and Star from three sides. Weapons hummed, glowing blue. Daniel's chest tightened, but he stood tall, ready. Star lifted her hands, her glow blazing brighter. The warehouse shook as the hunters opened fire. The blasts tore through the air, but Star bent the light again. Curving the beams away, the energy struck the walls. Exploding crates into splinters, Daniel charged forward through the shimmer, his pipe crashing against the leader's arm. The weapon clattered to the floor, sparking. The hunter swung a fist, but Daniel blocked it with the pipe, slamming the end into the man's ribs. The hunter groaned, staggering back. Star's voice rose louder, her glow flaring like a star about to burst. She spread her hands wide and the air rippled. One hunter was lifted off his feet, thrown across the warehouse into a pile of broken metal. The other staggered as his weapon melted in his grip, the blue light sputtering out. Daniel's heart pounded, disbelief flooding him. She wasn't just glowing, she was fighting, using her very light as a weapon. But the leader roared, pulling a blade from his coat. It gleamed with strange energy, crackling with power. He lunged toward Star, blade raised. Daniel moved fast, throwing himself between them. The blade cut across his arm. Burning hot pain shot through him, but he didn't stop. He swung the pipe with all his strength, smashing it into the leader's head. The hunter collapsed to the ground, the blade clattering beside him. Daniel stumbled, clutching his arm, blood dripping down his sleeve. Star caught him before he fell, her glow dimming as she focused on him. Her hands pressed against the wound, warmth spreading into his skin. The bleeding slowed. The burning pain faded slightly. Daniel gasped, looking at her in shock. "You can heal too?" Her lips trembled, but she nodded, whispering, "Small, only small." The warehouse fell silent except for their ragged breathing. 2 hunters lay unconscious, the third too injured to rise. Daniel leaned on Star, exhausted but alive. She looked at him with wide eyes, her glow faint but steady. "You fight," she whispered, awe in her voice. "Human fight. Like no other." Daniel gave a weak smile. "And you're not so bad yourself." For a moment, they stood together in the ruined warehouse, not as a human and an alien, but as 2 souls bound by the choice to fight side by side. The hunters had not won, but Daniel knew this was not the end. Somewhere above the city, their ship still waited. More would come, stronger and faster. Yet as Star held his hand, her eyes filled with fierce light, he felt a strange certainty. Together, they could stand against anything. The warehouse was quiet now. The hunters lay broken and defeated among the wreckage, their weapons sparking uselessly. Daniel leaned heavily against the wall, his arm still sore from the cut. Star stood beside him, her glow faint but steady, her dark eyes filled with both relief and exhaustion. For the first time since she arrived, the fear in her face had lessened. But the silence that followed was heavy, filled with the question neither dared to speak. Would more hunters come? Daniel wiped sweat from his brow, his breath ragged. He glanced at the unconscious figures on the floor. "They'll send others," he muttered. "This isn't over." Star nodded slowly, her voice soft. "Always more." "Never end." She hugged the blanket close around herself. Though her glow still peeked through, Daniel clenched his fists, determination burning in his chest. "Then we make sure they don't take you." No matter what, they slipped out of the warehouse before dawn. The streets were empty, the city still asleep. Daniel led her through back alleys. Keeping his head low, Star walked close to him, her bare feet silent on the cold pavement. Her hand clutched his sleeve, as if letting go meant she would vanish. Every sound made Daniel's pulse quicken. Every shadow looked like danger, but somehow, they reached the edge of the city without being seen. An old farmhouse stood abandoned on the outskirts, its roof cracked, its windows broken. Daniel pushed open the creaking door and stepped inside. The air was dusty, but the place was quiet. Hidden from the world, Star followed, her eyes scanning the empty space. For the first time, she seemed to relax, her shoulders lowering slightly. "Safe?" she asked softly, her voice hopeful. Daniel looked around and nodded. "Safe enough? For now." He cleared a space in the corner. Laying down an old blanket, Star sat carefully, her body trembling with exhaustion. Daniel sat across from her, leaning against the wall. The rising sun streamed through the broken window, painting her silver skin with golden light. For a long moment, they said nothing. The silence between them was no longer heavy with fear. But gentle, almost peaceful, Star finally spoke. Her words slow and broken. "Daniel, why help me?" He rubbed the back of his neck, unsure how to answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because no one else would." Her eyes softened, shimmering faintly. "Many pass. I'll see. I'll leave," she whispered. "Only you stop." Daniel looked at her, feeling a weight in his chest. "Because you deserve someone to stop," he said quietly. "And now, I guess you're stuck with me." Her lips curved into a faint smile, small but real. She reached out with trembling fingers and touched his injured arm gently. Her glow spread faintly, easing the pain again. Daniel watched her, amazed. "You could have chosen anyone in the city," he said. "But you waited for me." She shook her head softly. "Not anyone. Only human with heart," her voice cracked, but her eyes held steady. "And I find him." The farmhouse became their shelter in the days that followed. Daniel scavenged food and supplies. Teaching Star simple words she learned quickly, repeating everything with care. Sometimes she laughed softly when she mispronounced, a sound so rare it filled the empty house with warmth. Other times she sat quietly staring at the horizon, as if listening for sounds only she could hear. At night, the fear sometimes returned, her body glowing faintly as she whispered in her language. But Daniel was always near, reminding her she was not alone anymore. One evening after gathering firewood, Daniel found her outside. She stood barefoot in the field, her silver skin shining under the stars. The night air carried her soft humming. Gentle this time, no longer frantic, he stepped closer. Watching silently when she turned, her eyes met his and she spoke a word clearly. Without hesitation, home. Daniel froze. His chest tightening, she pointed to the farmhouse. Then to him, repeating, home. Her voice trembled, but it carried certainty. Daniel felt a lump in his throat. For her, a runaway chained and hunted. This broken farmhouse was more than shelter. It was the first place she could call home. He stepped closer and placed a hand on her shoulder. You're right, he whispered. We'll make this home. Together. Star lowered her head, her voice barely more than a breath. Together. Her glow pulsed softly, wrapping them both in faint silver light. It was no longer a shield, no longer a desperate cry for safety. It was warmth, trust, and belonging. The hunters had failed to take her. The city had turned its back on her. But one human had stopped. One human had offered his hand. And now the galaxy's chains had broken. Not with weapons, not with war, but with the simple power of kindness. As the stars spread across the night sky, Daniel and Star stood side by side. The world outside was still dangerous. The hunters would return, but for this moment, for this night, there was peace. She had found her new home. And Daniel had found something he never expected. A purpose, a bond, and a future that no force in the galaxy could break.